Hi students, so I noticed that you guys are having some issues with your literary analysis paper, so I thought that I would give you an example to maybe help aid you in your revisions. So first I'm going to start with the germ of a thought. So when I was reading Fences, I was particularly interested in this kind of idea of the American dream. So I start with that, as you can see right here in the center. From that point, I think about, okay, well, how does he convey that American dream? And from there, I said he used two different literary devices. One, he used symbols, and I thought about the different symbols throughout the text. And then two, I developed the idea that he used motifs, and I thought about the motifs he developed throughout the text. Since I'm particularly interested in how he uses the motifs to share the American dream, specifically I'm kind of interested in this idea of two contrasting ones, which is baseball and death, and seeds and growth. So from that point I thought about those motifs that he used, and I realized in thinking that he has associated baseball and death always with Troy, who is always fighting for equality. Then the motifs of seeds and growth are always associated with Rose, and she is always fighting for her family. So I think that that develops kind of this really neat comparison and contrast of how he perceives those two motifs throughout the entire text. So then the next point that I would go to after I've kind of gotten my area is to think about some questions that I need to answer to be able to understand what I'm trying to argue. So one, I need to know, what is the American dream? Two, how did the American dream develop? Who developed the dream? Three, were any groups excluded from the American dream? Since I am specifically looking at a text about African Americans, this question seems to be pertinent. Four, how does August Wilson perceive the American dream in Fences? Now 1 through 4 is kind of this preliminary historical investigation that I need to do on my own to wrap my head around what it is I'm trying to write and how those ideas developed in history. The next thing that I want to do is I want to think about how he perceives the American dream in Fences. Now that's not anything I can get anywhere except from my idea, from my reading of the text. So as you can see, I went around and I did my research, and then I developed my thesis statement right here at the bottom. And so my thesis then is that August Wilson contrasts the motifs of death and baseball with seeds and growth to convey how the hope to live out the true American dream lies within the family. So as you can see right here, the first part comes from my brainstorming of the contrast, and then I thought about what message is he trying to send about the American dream. And that's the second part of my thesis, and that's to convey how the hope to live out the true American dream lies within the family. So in thinking about this, I realized that I'm kind of going back, thinking about the ideas of baseball and death. So Troy is always associated with those motifs, and his constant fight throughout the entire text is for equality. So first he's searching for equality in the baseball leagues, and then he's searching for equality in the workplace, and he's not overall concerned with his family. He's just more concerned with being a provider. And August Wilson doesn't convey that to be the right route to attain happiness, as we can see with Troy's outcome. But he does seem to convey some positive thoughts with Rose's outlook, and she's always associated with seeds and growth. and then her main concern is the family. So that would then lead me to the belief that August Wilson says that it's more important to be there for your family and develop your family and love your family than it is to search for equality out in the world. Not that equality is bad by any means, but that the family is where you can develop the American dream, where you can find happiness in the American dream. So the next step then would be to start writing my paper. And let me change the paper for you so you can see the paper. Okay. So what I did to start off with is I started off with that idea of the American dream. And so as you can see right here, I start off very broad. Remember that your introduction should work very much like an upside down triangle. So it should start off very general and get more specific. And you will be able to see that in the text. So as you can see, I start, authors throughout history have constantly evolved the notion of the American dream for the people of the United States. During the initial development of the nation, the American dream was embodied in the idea that, quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. End quote. And then I have my citation right there. While initially the definition of all men was read as an exclusionary group, which only included Caucasian men of wealth, the statement has been reinterpreted over time to include men and women of different races, nationalities, and class statuses. So as you can see, I'm kind of developing that general idea, going now towards discussing August Wilson. So then the next sentence right here is going in straight towards the text. So in the early 1980s, playwright August Wilson reinterpreted the American dream, specifically for African Americans, in his 10-play series known as the Pittsburgh Cycle. So I'm moving in, and I'm going to start talking about August Wilson. Now, in your introduction, you don't want to focus too much on generalities. You do want to have about equal parts going from that, from those general discussion to the text. So as you can see in kind of a color format, right, it's about half and half. Now I am famously known for my super long introductions, so by no means does your introduction need to be this long, but I'm just using this as an example for you. So the next one, I need to make sure that my sentences hold hands, so I'm using a transition. In the Pittsburgh Cycle, Wilson wrote one play examining the African American experience in each decade of the 20th century. So I'm starting to lead into developing this idea that I am focusing on fences. The Pulitzer Prize winning play Fences was the third play written in Wilson's cycle about the struggles of African American men and women during the 1950s. Despite the fact that the 1950s was the start of the civil rights movement, in Fences, Wilson does not provide the reader with the notion that the African American dream lies solely within equality. Rather, August Wilson contrasts the modus of death and baseball with seeds and growth to convey how the hope to live out the true American dream lies within the family. And so there you have my thesis. Moving along, I then developed I have one full body paragraph to show you and the topic sentence of the next body paragraph. And that's hopefully will be enough to kind of give you an idea of what you're supposed to be doing. So this is the part where many of you fall into the major pitfall of summarizing. You just provide me with the story. Remember that this is an analysis, so you have to provide analysis. Sometimes it requires a little summary, but your whole paragraph should not consist of summarizing. So let's look at this paragraph then. And we have right here then the topic sentence. The motives of death and baseball are always associated with the protagonist and tragic hero Troy Maxson. So it's good in a literary analysis to use those literary words that we know and not be so vague in general. So for instance, you can see right here the protagonist, the tragic hero, the motives, right? And I am very specific because I'm referencing which character I'm going to talk about. So remember that the author does the characterization, and so that leads us into kind of our intro to analysis part. August Wilson characterizes Troy as an African-American man whom has faced adversity all throughout his life. In his younger years, Troy was not able to play in the major leagues because of his race. So I'm kind of presenting one of the problems. The racist ideology continues to haunt Troy's every existence. Semicolon because it's an abrupt introduction to a quote, but you do in fact notice that I do have an introduction to my quote. I'm not just dropping it in. And then I have my evidence right here. I'm talking about if you could play ball, then they ought to have let you play. Don't care what color you were. Come telling me I come along too early. If you could play, then they ought to have let you play. So as you remember that in your citation, you need the very first citation to include the full citation right there. Please remember that you need Wilson, comma, space, 1986, comma, P dot space 12, close, and then your punctuation goes on the end. So here's where I start to provide my analysis then, is when I'm going into the next sentence. So I'm going to tell my reader what you should think about that piece of evidence. Even though Troy was able to play ball for the Negro Leagues, not being able to play for the major leagues has tainted his view on life, and thus the ability for an African American man to pursue his version of the American dream. So again, key component, I'm going back to that idea of the thesis statement, right, which is dealing with the American dream. So right here then, I am going to lead into some more evidence to suggest this, and you see that. Consequently, which is a great transitional word that helps your reader move along in your text. Consequently, Troy continuously associates death with baseball. And here is evidence to show that. Death ain't nothing. I done seen him, done wrestled with him. You can't tell me nothing about death. Death ain't nothing but a fastball in the outside corner. As you notice with the second citation, you then do not have to put the full citation. You can just put the page number. Again, you need to follow the idea of telling your reader what to think about that piece of evidence. This is where you provide your analysis. Troy's confidence and hubris in beating death at his own game will ultimately lead to his own demise. Interestingly enough, though, Troy does not let the sting of the Jim Crow laws hold him back from fighting for equality at work later in his life. Since the motives of baseball and death are innately connected with Troy's fight for equality, Augusta Wilson appears to suggest how the fight for equality is not necessarily the hope to fulfill the American dream. So I could probably develop another paragraph with some more evidence to support this claim, but for the sake of my purpose in helping you understand what you're doing, I did not do so. But I did go ahead and provide a transition into the next paragraph, which is, on the other hand, August Wilson connects the character Rose Maxson with the motives of seeds and growing. and I would develop that paragraph into showing how August Wilson can